Hello everyone.
Hi everybody. Starting live video. Let's see if it's started okay.
We haven't lit our candles.
Oh, light them up, Chloe.
Dear, oh dear.
Light them up while I do the say good day to everybody. Hi folks, Soul of a Poet. We're now up to Saturday streaming concert number 14. Welcome everybody. Some of you have been with us for all of them, I think, all 14, and welcome to a couple of new faces too already. It's the Soul of a Poet. We're here in Millthorpe, first of all, tell you where we are. For those who are tuning in a bit further afield, we're in the Tablelands, the soft country of New South Wales. Behind you we've got a beautiful painting of Mr. John Dengate, who turned 80, would have turned 80 a couple of days ago. We've been thinking of John a lot. That's who we sing to, that's our face. And behind John, 250 kilometres in that direction, is Sydney. Off to the north and south and east and west. And we're in the Tablelands, so soft country, and we're directly, almost exactly halfway between where Henry Lawson was born, in Grenfell, about 2 hours in that direction, and where he spent all of his childhood and teen years and all his growing up and all those formative times just up here between Mudgee and Golgong, a place that they called Pipe Clay and is now called Urundery. But it is Soul of a Poet 3, so we'll be thinking of Henry in the last 20-something years of his life, and ducking backwards and forwards a little bit too. Before we do, some of you will know already, but we're sitting on Wiradjuri country here, a large part of the middle of New South Wales, the land of the three rivers, so the Womble, the Macquarie, the Kalare or the Lachlan, and the Murrumbidgee, sort of mark the boundaries, more or less, of Wiradjuri country. How lucky are we to call this wonderful part of the world home. Somewhere around about the late 19th century, though, it became Henry Lawson country as well, and so we'll be singing him home eventually today. It was 25 years ago we were in Golgong in the Centennial. I mentioned in the first show that we were speaking to an old fellow and we were singing lots of Henry Lawson songs in Golgong, in his hometown. I said to this old bloke, it seems like Henry Lawson was sung in the bush, as soon as it was written. And he said, memorably, he said to me, Jason, Henry Lawson was sung in the bush before it was written. He's sort of almost in the back door as Australia's greatest songwriter in a lot of ways. Now, yes, we thank Henry. Henry leapt into song very quickly, but the man we really thank is Chris Kempster, the late Chris Kempster, who collected and gathered and wrote tunes for Henry's words himself and built the songbook, the amazing Songs of Henry Lawson songbook.
Yeah, with contributions from all over.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's an amazing piece of work, that songbook, and we've been delving into it for this week. You'll hear quite a bit of Chris's work this week. Including
this one. Chris wrote this tune when he was just a teenager, late teens. We shared a bit of a home in the Tablelands town of Portland for a while. So we'll be thinking of Portland when we sing this one. Very close to Henry Lawson country, very similar scrub around there. And this song became almost like the big bang of Australian bush and folk music, and really Australian music, modern Australian music. He wrote the tune for Reedy River, which became the title song of the famous play that went forever, the early days of the Bush Music Club and the Bushwhackers, the original Bushwhackers, with John Meredith and Alex Hood and those guys, and Chris Kempster. So this show tonight is dedicated, yes, to Henry, cheers to Henry, but to our memories of Chris Kempster. And it was all those years ago where we met Chris and ended up playing in his show, the Songs of Henry Lawson, and we'll be thinking of him. We learnt so much in those times. So this song we haven't really sung since Chris's funeral all those years ago. It was a hard one to get through that day in 2004, that's for sure. But it's been a real pleasure to revisit Henry's beautiful poem, Reedy River. You'll hear mention of Mary Campbell in here as he sort of dips his toe into the waters of love. Mary Campbell later would become Mary Gilmore, Dame Mary Gilmore. So yeah, we'll be thinking of Henry and love a little bit tonight. So I know a lot of you know this one. Please do
Yes, sing along.
Please do sing along. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all. Please do sing along. Reedy River, Henry's poem from 1896. And like I say, Chris Kempster's beautiful tune. The Big Bang of Australian Music, 1949.
Yeah. 10 miles down Reedy River, what a pool of water lies, and all the year it mirrors the changes in the skies, and in that pool's broad bosom is room for all the stars. Its bed a plant of drifted or countless rocky bars. Around the lower edges there waves a bed of reeds, where water rats are hidden and where the wild duck breeds. The grassy slopes rise gently to ridges long and low, where groves of wattle flourish and native bluebells grow. Beneath the granite ridges the eye may just discern where Rocky Creek emerges from deep green banks of fern, and standing tall between them the grassy she-oaks cool the hard blue tinted waters before they reach the pool. 10 miles down Reedy River, one Sunday afternoon, I rode with Mary Campbell to that broad bright lagoon. We left our horses grazing till shadows climbed the peak, and strolled beneath the she-oaks on the banks of Rocky Creek. Then home along the river, that night we rode a race, and the moonlight lent a glory to Mary Campbell's face. I pleaded for my future all through that moonlight ride, until our weary horses drew closer side by side. 10 miles from Ryan's Crossing and 5 below the peak, I built a little homestead on the banks of Rocky Creek. I cleared the land and fenced it and plowed the rich red loam, and my first crop was golden when I brought Mary home. Now still down Reedy River, the grassy she-oaks sigh, the waterholes still mirror the pictures in the sky. The golden sand is drifting across the rocky bars, and over all forever go sun and moon and stars. But of the hut I builded there are no traces now, and many rains have leveled the furrows of my plough. The glad bright days have vanished amber branches wave, their wattle blossom golden above my Mary's grave.
I know Chris spoke of that last verse there as Henry almost not being able to trust the happiness. I'm not sure about that. Henry often in his work takes a longer view. You'll find that again and again. And of course, if you look long enough, people die, and that can creep in there. Yeah, Mary Gilmore was Mary Cameron, more or less.
She was the love that came and left too. So I think this song talks about that a bit. It's the imagined life that didn't happen.
Chris Kempster's fingerprints, his DNA, are in this next tune as well. But I think it's been panel beaten and handed around a little bit as well. This song actually comes from 1891, and comes from a poem of Henry's called "The Shame of Going Back." Now, I know Doug Jenner sung this one and had a bit of a hand in the tune, but we actually learnt it from the Loaded Dog fellas over in Western Australia, and Phil Roeterdink sung it there, and also had his hand in the tune. These things get handed around and changed as they go. Henry's actually writing about his time in 1891 where he had his first real job as what he thought of as a journalist, writing for the Boomerang, writing on the Shearer strikes in Queensland, writing from Brisbane about the Shearer strikes and his strong sympathies for the Union. He was accused of sedition in the Queensland Parliament, and writing songs like Freedom on the Wallaby and so forth. It seems that even though the folding of the Boomerang and Henry's return to Sydney was no fault of Henry's at all, it seems that he did take it very hard, and that's how he come to write this song, something very resonant in this poem for a lot of people. We've all been there at least a little bit, if not a lot, and if a few times, if not often, the coming back of failure and how that hurts. And it hurt Henry, is clearly. We're actually thinking more, I think, when we sing this song, about Henry coming back from England. Through the 1890s, after he'd married Bertha, and Bertha supported Henry as our great literary genius, and no doubt they were in love, and the eloping was very quick, and very soon after, I think, the Dusk to Dawn Club is happening in Sydney, and Henry's drinking a lot, and struggling to fall into a home life. He was a tiger in the town, and just struggling at home. So he's drinking too much. I think everyone kind of thinks of Henry's drinking too much. No doubt Archibald at the Bulletin in 1891 thought Henry was drinking too much, and that's why he sent him out to Bourke, which was not going to help things. There were several other attempts after Henry got married to get him away from the grog, away from the company, and away from the Dusk to Dawn folks, and away from the club. New Zealand, Western Australia. There were varying levels of success, and there were great spells of time when Henry was off the grog. He's writing always. He's writing through this time. They went to England finally. I think the decision there was, yes, get away from the company and away from the grog, but also that Australia was too small to support a man who really just wanted to write for his job. And maybe England was, in those days, a place he could go for a bigger market, but it was a bad idea from the start. Bertha ends up very sick, and Henry's drinking in England. Bertha spent a lot of time mentally ill, I guess, and struggling and basically in care, in hospital because of her struggles. Henry's drinking. They ended up coming back in 1902. Now, when they left, they had 2 children. Jim was 2, and little Bertha, as they called her, she was only a couple of months old when they sailed off to England. They were in care a lot of the time in England. And when he came back, it was pretty obvious that was about it for the relationship. So, yes, the shame of going back came round to get Henry again. When you've come to make your fortune, you haven't made your soul, and the reason for your failure isn't anybody's fault. And you haven't got a billet, and the times are very slack. There is nothing that can spur you like the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. When the place and you are strangers and you struggle all alone, and you have a mighty longing for the power you are known, and your clothes are very shabby and your future's very black, there is nothing that can hurt you like the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. Oh, it's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. When we've fought the battle bravely and are beaten to the wall, 'tis sneers of men, not conscience, that makes cowards of us all. And while you are returning, your brain is on the rack, and your heart is in the shadow of the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. When a beaten man's discovered with a bullet in his brain, they post-mortem him and try him, they say he was insane. But it very often happens that he lately got the sack, and his onward move was owing to the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. Oh, it's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Ah, my friend, you call it nonsense and your upper lip is curled. I can see that you have never worked your passage through the world. If fortune rounds upon you and the rain is on the track, you'll learn the bitter meaning of the shame of going back. Going home with empty pockets, going back harder. It's then you learn the meaning of humiliation's carp. Crawling home with empty pockets, going home harder. It's then you'll taste the poison in humiliation's carp. In 1910, Henry released a bunch of prose. Some people were of the opinion that Manning Clark, I know, said that when Henry wrote verse, he was preaching and whinging, and when he turned to prose, he turned into a giant. I don't really agree with that, but I guess we can all see to some extent where he's coming from. He wrote this little bit of prose that really struck me. It's from a short bit of prose that he's called The Rising of the Court, and he calls it drunk tank philosophy. Certainly by this stage Henry knows a lot about this. They're now back in Sydney, and both Bertha and Henry, but especially Henry, drinking again. In 1902 there's the famous fall, in quotes, off the cliff at Manly, which who knows, but how much, but he certainly did attempt suicide at least once, if not twice or three times in that time. But he wrote this, which I really like. He said, I myself, on bail, on a charge of plain drunk, Oh, it was drunk and disorderly, but a kindly sergeant changed it to plain drunk. Well, I always thought my drunk was ornamental. Yeah, I'm not ashamed, only comfortably dulled and a little tired, dully interested and observant, and hopeful for the sunlight presently. We low persons get too great a contempt for things to feel much ashamed at any time, and this very contempt keeps many of us from reforming. We hear too many lies sworn that we know to be lies. We see too many unjust and brutal things done that we know to be brutal and unjust. And then 2 years later he wrote a poem of great insight. I know Mick's tuned in tonight, Mick Griffin. Thanks, Mick, for this one. It's a cracker of a poem that I hadn't read too much before, called Down and Out. You'll often hear them mutter, fellow men and brother men, when he's down and in the gutter, oh, he'll never rise again. And they turn aside and beckon to the trainers of their pride. He's the one the less to reckon in the selfish race they ride. 'Tis the old deep down survival of the savage in mankind, in the triumph or arrival whom his weakness left behind. Weakness or a vice resulting from a help we never knew, and we go our ways exulting that our strength has pulled us through. Though we never learn to labour, love or hate, or hope or doubt, we seem better than our neighbour when our neighbour's down and out. We, in our pretended meekness, sorrow, pity, help and all, we feel stronger for his weakness. We feel nobler for his fall. Yes, hypocrisy representeth its own self in tale and song, while the prodigal repenteth and the godly son goes wrong. But I know the shadows stealing where ambition broods and smarts, jealousy, the deep down feeling in our secret heart of hearts. And while we pass in pride before him, sullen in his misery, there's a woman bending o'er him, seeing things we cannot see. And though we walk in highest places, seeming honest, straight and true, as she is saying to our faces, he's a better man than you. Let us not be sure of any of our rival fellow men. I have witnessed far too many rise and fall and rise again. And the prostitute and liar rise to heaven out of hell, and the drunkard rising higher than the man who never fell. For the love of those who love him, and the contempt of those who hate, for his God, all gods above him, and the mastery of his fate. And for those brave few friends who are ever saying, staunch and true, he's a better man than you are. He's a better man than you. Part of Henry's troubles in this situation left him spending some time basically for not paying his way, the maintenance, the alimony, I think they still called it in those days, for the marriage, which was never actually a divorce, but it was certainly, I can't remember the exact legal terminology, but it was not really a marriage anymore except on paper. And so Henry is trying to write for a living. He's failing at, well, he can do almost nothing else, but his writing keeps going and his writing keeps paying the bills. But he didn't always pay his way. His two children are getting older, and Bertha had a horrible time, I'm sure, trying just to look after them. So yes, Henry spent some time in Darlinghurst Jail, what he called Starvinghurst Jail. That big stone building is East Sydney TAFE, or the art school. I used to work there, selling books to the art students, and it's a great place these days, full of atmosphere and stories and ghosts and interesting little carvings on the wall, and always sort of, people like Frank Gardner, the bushranger and so forth, going back in time. But Henry spent his fair share of time there. And here he is writing yet again for those without a voice. with a poem that he called 103. He wrote it in 1908. Now, this is Chris Kempster's tune as well, but I bet we're not the only one who hears it actually in Len Neary's voice. The late Len Neary sang this when we were first doing the show aroundabouts with Chris and a cast of thousands at times. It was Len that sang this song, and I always hear his voice. Such a wonderful fella and a really beautiful singer.
Yeah, the irony doesn't escape you either when you read this poem, because there's no doubt that Henry, while the experience is real, he didn't write this poem in jail.
No.
Because they wouldn't let him write in jail, so
No.
he couldn't earn any money while he was in there either.
Yeah, there's a savage irony for you, yeah. He did get some of his fellow prisoners stole a pencil and some paper from somewhere, and he rewrote poems for them. So yes, we have Henry showing that drive to write for those who don't have a voice, to speak for those who can't speak. But yes, it would have been nice if he could have plied his trade and maybe caught up with his bills and looked after his kids and his wife. Yeah.
Well,
Funny thing.
with the frame of a man and the face of a boy and a manner strangely wild, and the great wide wonder in innocent eyes of a silent suffering child. With his hideous dress and his heavy boots he drags to eternity, and the warder says in a softened tone, "Keep step 103. Where 5 men do the work of a boy with the waters not to see. It is sad and bad and uselessly mad, it's as ugly as it can be. From the flower beds laid to fit the jail, encircled and lie absurd, to the gilded weathercock on the church, agape like a strangled bird. The great round church with its volume of sound, where we dare not turn our eyes, they take us there from our separate hells to sing of paradise. The high church service swells and swells where the tinted Christs look down. It is easy to see who is weary and faint and weareth the thorny crown. They double lock at 4 o'clock, and the warders leave their keys, and a governor strolls with a friend at eve through his stone conservatories. Their window slits are like idiot mouths with square stone chins a-drop, and the weather stains for the dribble, and the dead flat foreheads atop. The press is printing its smug lies and paying its shameful debt. Speaks of the comforts that prisoners have and the holidays prisoners get. The visitors come with their smug smiles to the jail on a working day, and the public hears with its large ears what authorities have to say. The champagne lady comes home from the course in charge of the criminal swell. They carry her in from the motor car to the lift in the Grand Hotel. But armed with the savage Habituals Act, they're waiting for you and me. And drunkards in judgment on drunkards sit. Keep step 103. The clever scoundrels are all outside, and the money snugs in jail, then do 12 months for a mad wife's lies, or life for a strumpet's tail. If the people knew what the warders know, and felt as the prisoners feel, if the people knew, they would storm their jails as they storm the old Bastille. I clang the spoon on the iron floor and shove the bread with your toe, and shut with a bang the iron door and clank the bolt just so. But 103 is near the end when the clonking jail bell sounds. He cannot swallow the milk they send when the doctor's gone his rounds. They've smuggled him out of the hospital with no one to tell the tale, but it's little the doctors and nurses can do for the patient from Starvinghurst jail, and the blanket and screen are ready to draw. There are footsteps light and free, and the angels are whispering o'er his bed, keep step 103.
Yes, here's to Len Neary indeed. I'm just going to check that camera, Chloe, because I think we've got an interruption. We might have anyway.
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh no, it seems to be still going. I really hope it is out there, guys. We've just got, we're sort of at the mercy of the interweb and all the various things that go on, but I hope you can see us out there.
Oh,
and yes, Margaret Walters, here's to Len Neary. Absolutely. Here's to Len.
Yeah, if you can still hear us, send us a comment. Thanks. That would be good.
Yeah, and I'll just press reset on this one too. Maybe that'll help. So some people out there will be counting, and we are indeed heading up to the time of the Great War. And Henry, like a lot of his contemporaries, including Banjo, was in favour of the war. By this point in his life, he'd felt let down by his bush mates, his people, us. He felt let down by the unions. I think he thought that they'd been taken over by a certain academic strain, which was a long way. But then he'd also had the experience out there at Burke where he'd actually been in the shed and felt let down by the workers as well. And let down by his left-wing politics generally, and also, most importantly, and always knew that he felt let down by himself. He let himself down. He was driven by the idea of Australia as a republic. I'm absolutely convinced that that Henry Lawson's politics came from two things. What I would call a socialism in the room. So in other words, looking after your mate. If someone's in your company, then you look after them, they look after you, and we share. Also, it was driven by, I think, the idea that Australia was home. I think there was a very clear divide in Australian society in his time between the working people, us, who considered this as home and had dearly fell in love with our bush or our city. We had, for 2 or 3 generations, some of us had agency in our lives that had never been had in Ireland or England. It was a new thing. Yes, convicts, ex-convicts, the children of convicts, but cornstalks, settlers, had their own life and home. Whereas the Tories of the day still considered home to be England. And I think that partly when Henry was away in England we had a federation, but then he came back and just felt completely let down by it all, including, of course, his own situation with mental illness and alcoholism. So he was in favour of the war, but he was not like some people around at the time. He saw, he had a clear-sighted prescience, that characteristic Lawson clear-sightedness to see that this was going to be a big battle. The Great War, war to end all wars. well, we were going to lose a lot of Australian lives. And in 1915, he wrote the Route March, and we'll sing it now with Cathie O'Sullivan's tune.
Did you hear the children singing, oh my brothers, oh my sisters? Did you hear the children singing as our troops went marching past, in the sunshine and the rain, as they'll never sing again? Hear the little schoolgirls singing as our troops went swinging past. Did you hear the children singing, oh my brothers, oh my sisters? Did you hear the children singing for the first man and the last, as they marched away and vanished to a tune we thought was banished? Did you hear the children singing for the future and the past? Shall you hear the children singing, oh my brothers, oh my sisters? Shall you hear the children singing in the sunshine or the rain? There'll be sobs beneath the ringing of the cheers, and neath the singing there'll be tears of orphan children when our boys come back again. There'll be tears of orphan children.
Henry tried to enlist. He wasn't just putting his words behind the war effort. He tried desperately to go. But pick your reason for him being knocked back. He was 47 at the start of the war. He's largely deaf. He had all kinds of physical health and mental health problems, alcoholism, probably quite aware of some of his radical politics as well. So even as the casualties list started growing, and they basically started to take almost anyone who could stand up, young kids and people with all kinds of problems into the 15 and 16 of the war, they still knocked Henry back. But the funny, strange, interesting thing about this time is it's not a very well-known part of Henry's life. He was out, he took a state-sponsored job. By this stage, he was under the care of the seemingly saintly Mrs. Byers, who was sort of like a mother and mate, looked after him. And they both went out to Yanco, near Leeton, in the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, the new irrigation area, a state-sponsored job, to go and sort of become a tourism or write pieces that could attract new people to come and get involved with the agriculture that they were hoping would explode out there, and in fact did. And he was very happy. And I think one of the main reasons he was happy, it was a dry area. Yet another attempt to get Henry away from the grog. Well, he wasn't off the grog. It seems that he had some grog at home, and he ran into a long-lost mate of his. You'll remember if you saw show one that he's almost the definition of friendship for Henry, mateship, was Jim Gordon. Jim Gordon was the bloke he worked at Terrell Woolshed with at Burke, and then they tramped to Hungerford and back together. Seems like he was almost the sort of archetypal mate, but he didn't see him for a quarter of a century. But he was there at Yanco Leeton, and they spent all that time in each other's company, drinking, going out camping, carrying their swags out to the river. Jim Gordon was undeniably a great bushman, so I think we can take his word for it when he says Henry was a great bushman, that he loved the bush dearly, that his time in the bush, that he knew the bush well, and that he was... I know Jim spoke about him as being the perfect mate in a camp. He was the one who had everything organised, did large amounts of the work. Jim said you'd never be cold if you're out with Henry, but you'd wake up in the morning and he'd woken up and thrown his extra blanket on you. There's that socialism in the room again, that care for your mate. And he was happy. And when they wanted a big drink, they'd jump over the border to the big drinking town of Narrandera. maybe down to Gundagai. And I wonder if he did hear this song. It's a long way to Riverina, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Riverina, and the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Wagga Wagga, farewell dear old me. It's a long, long way to Riverina, but we'll get there someday. Yes, the war was raging in Europe, and there he was, having the time of his life, it seemed. We don't think of Henry as happy in those towards the end of his life, but I think he was, relatively speaking, very happy with Jim out there. And kind of Mrs. Byers, I think he talks about it like she's getting on his nerves a bit, but I bet he was getting on her nerves too. But he tried to enlist again. He was knocked back. Some people prosecute an argument that Henry's best work was written in the 19th century, that he was a far better prose writer than a poet. I don't think so. And that his Exhibit A, if you really want a piece to sort of argue the case that Henry's best work was far from behind him at this time in his life, he wrote Scots of the Riverina in 1917, 2 years after the Route March. And this tune's from Aid Monsbourgh. But I always think of this one in John Dengate's voice. This is so. Yeah, John would have turned 80 a couple of days ago, so we'll think of John when we sing this one.
The boy cleared out to the city from his home at the harvest time. They were Scots of the Riverina, and to run from home was a crime. The old man burned his letters, the first and the last he burned, and he scratched his name from the Bible when the old wife's back was turned. A year went past and another, there were calls from the firing line. They heard the boy had enlisted, but the old man made no sign. His name must never be mentioned on the farm by Gundagai, a Scot of the Riverina, with ever the kirk hard by. Came home on his final heave, and the township's bonfire burned. His mother's arms were about him, but the old man's back was turned. The daughters begged for pardon, till the old man raised his hand, a Scot of the Riverina, who was hard to understand. The boy was killed in Flanders, where the best and the bravest die. There were tears at the Graham homestead and grief in Gundagai. But the old man ploughed at daybreak, and the old man ploughed till the murk. There were furrows of pain in the orchard, while his household went to the curb. The hurricane lamp in the rafters, oh, it dimly and dimly burned, and the old man died at the table when the old wife's back was turned. Face down on his bare arms folded, he sank with his wild grey hair outspread with the open Bible, and a name rewritten there.
So, if you ever wanted a piece to capture the damage and loss of the Great War, that'll do it. Another of Chris Kempster's setting now, and we'll think again about Henry, dear Henry, and love. Before he went to England, he had fallen in love, we think, or at least been flattered by and had a relationship, maybe an affair, maybe not, with Hannah Thorburn. And on his way home, things were not good. Bertha's doctor, his wife's Bertha's doctor, not his daughter, but his wife, and many other people. Mary Gilmore, of all people, visited them with her husband in England, and that was not a good situation. Bertha had been in an asylum for most of that time. She was considered a danger, it seems, to herself and to her family. I don't even know where to start with that, because I can't imagine trying to live with Henry, and they seem to have been not good together, not good. But Bertha came home with the two kids under the kind of chaperoned by Mary Gilmore, of all people, on a ship, with Henry not on the boat, coming home hard up, but on the boat, the next boat, a month later. It was not a good ride for Bertha and Mary. There was all kinds of explosions and encounters, and then their boat broke down on the way to Bombay, and Henry's boat ended up catching their boat, and he was, by this stage, was on a roaring drunk, and it was just a horrible situation. It got worse when they got back to Australia, because when the ship got to Adelaide, all the while home, I think Henry was thinking, yes, I've got a bad situation, but Hannah is in Australia. Hannah, I'm going back to Hannah in some way, in some form. And he found out when they got to Adelaide that she'd died 6 weeks before they'd arrived, possibly from an abortion gone wrong, maybe. There's a lot of guesses with this, but this is the piece that Henry wrote. Again, that's a heartbreaking song that's been made out of Henry's words. And this is another of Chris Kempster's tunes. Yeah, a beautiful tune. And another one that he wrote back when he was just young. He wrote this tune, I believe, in 1949. So I'm not sure how old Chris was, but I'm going to take a guess at late teens, 20. And it's, I don't know. You couldn't find a better tune for these words, I don't think. Other people have had a go. Slim Dusty wrote a tune for this one as well. He wrote some great tunes for Henry, but I think this is my favourite for this one. Before we sing this song, we'll just say welcome to those who've come in a bit later, and I guess we haven't said much about Saturday streaming. So they're free concerts. We've done 14 of them now, but we really encourage and hope for donations. People have been so generous, and it's really helping us out. It's a tough time for people to do what we do for a job, so we do appreciate it. I haven't got a link in there, but it's just our website, and when we finish I'll throw a link on there. A lot of you have donated before, and we really appreciate it. And if you're keen to donate tonight, that would be fantastic. Throw a bit in the hat, as we say. Yep. I know a couple of people have said that they've had the internet freeze tonight. It does happen, and it's hard to say why. But what we do is when we finish the show, as long as the technology hasn't let us down, and it hasn't yet.
Yeah, we've got the whole show here.
Yes, and we throw it up to YouTube. As long as the creeks don't rise and everything's okay, it goes up to YouTube. So, and we put track markers on it, and we're building quite an archive now. I think we're up over 20 hours of show, and by the end of this, will be nearly 5 hours of Henry, which has been a real pleasure to go kind of long form on Henry and Lawson. I've been waiting for years to do this. Do you think that I do not know? They say I never have written of love as a writer of song should do. They say that I never could touch the strings with a touch that is firm and true. They say I know nothing of women and men in the fields where love's roses grow. I must write, they say, with a halting pen. Do you think that I do not know? My love burst came like the English spring in the days when our hair was brown, and the hem of her skirt was a sacred thing, and her hair was an angel's crown. The shock when another man touched her arm, when the dancers all sat in a row, the hope, the despair, the false alarm. Do you think that I do not know? And by the harbour lies on the western farm, you remember the question put, why you held her warm in your quivering arms, and you trembled from head to foot. The electric shock from her fingertips, and the murmuring answer low, the soft, shy yielding of warm red lips. Do you think that I do not know? She was buried at Brighton where Gordon sleeps, and I was a world away. And the sad old garden his secret keeps, still nobody knows today. She left a message for me to read, where the wild, wide oceans flow. Do you know how the heart of a man can bleed? Do you think that I do not know? I stood by the grave where the dead girl lies, and the sunlit scenes were fair. 'Neath white clouds high in the autumn sky, well, I answered the message there. But the haunting words of the dead to me will go wherever I go. For she lives in the marriage that might have been. Do you think that I do not know? They say I never have written of love. They say that my heart is such that finer feelings are far above, that a writer may know too much. There are darkest depths in the brightest nights, when the clustering stars hang low. There are things it would break his strong heart to write. Do you think that I do not know? That same year that all that was going on, the trip home and Hannah dying and the marriage falling apart, by this stage little Bertha, little Bertha, the daughter, was 2, and he wrote 2 pieces. Well, we're going to sing 2 pieces, say 2 pieces from 1902.
You are not going to sing 2 of anything.
Okay. Would you welcome to the chair now, please? our big daughter, who is a lot more than 2, and she's going to do one of Henry's that
Not much, honestly.
just gives you an idea that nothing is simple, and that Henry had joy in these times. We all do, don't we? Nothing is simple, and it's very easy to think of Henry as being in a lot of trouble, and he was, but his joy with children was famous. I mean, those who knew him well called Henry Lawson a kind of a Peter Pan type character, endlessly young. All of the children around, especially the poor areas of Sydney, famously in the Rocks. There's a wonderful picture of him in North Sydney when some of North Sydney was quite working class, and the kids are all hanging out with him. They talk about him. "G'day, Mr. Lawson, how are you?" And he'd always have time to stop and play with kids. He loved Jim Gordon's kids as well. Loved playing with them and hanging out with them. But this is one he wrote called "When Bertha Comes to Tea."
When Bertha comes to tea, the kettle sings in glee. The cups and saucers clatter as they hear her chatter, and you wonder what's the matter when Bertha comes to tea. When Bertha comes to tea, her age, I think, is 3. She keeps you in a flutter, cutting cake and bread and butter. Oh, where does it go, you mutter, when Bertha comes to tea. When Bertha comes to tea, she isn't shy, not she. The house cat sees quite clearly that she loves him very dearly, but he's suffocated, nearly, when Bertha comes to tea. When Bertha comes to tea, along with you and me, she's sure to bring her dolly, then away with melancholy, and let us all be jolly. Now Bertha's come to tea.
Thank you, Megan. Quick getaway there. She'll be back though. Megan's got another poem and a piece of prose from Henry's to do for you, just in about 5 minutes. We wanted to sing this one, another one of Chris Kempster's extraordinary, achingly beautiful tunes, and Henry's poem that he simply called Bertha. And I believe Chris wrote this one in about 1984. Not sure where he was living at that point, and we just certainly didn't know him until about 10 years after that, or a bit more. But didn't he have a knack? And just to give it another plug again, that's the Kempster collection, tunes from every which way, traditional tunes and wonderful tunes from lots of different songwriters, as many of songs of Henry Lawson as you could possibly hope to see. And it's probably the greatest book ever compiled, anywhere, ever. And this song is certainly one of the ones in there. I'll just get this just a little bit closer to tune. Bertha said about Henry, he said, he was a far more powerful personality than any sentimental dreaming could make of him.
White solemn eyes that question me, we hand that pats my head, where only 2 have stroked before, and both of them are dead. A poor daddy mine, she says, with wondrous sympathy. Oh, baby girl, you don't know how you break the heart in me. Let friends and kinsfolk work their worst, let all say what they will. Your baby arms go round my neck, I'm your own daddy still. And you kiss me and I kiss you, fresh kisses frank and free. baby girl, you don't know how you break the heart in me. When I was good, I dreamed that when the snow showed in my hair, a household angel in her teens would flit about my chair to comfort me as I grow old, but that shall never be. Oh, baby girl, you don't know how you break the heart in me. But one shall love me while I live and soothe my troubled head, and never brook an unkind word of me when I am dead. For I shall like to hear my name, how disgraced it be. Ah, baby girl, you don't know how you help the heart in me. It seems like Henry's faith in his daughter's love was justified. And Bertha later wrote of her father, I can love him because he stands above us all, because his fun and friendship, his troubled, tragic spirit, his rugged ways, the vision that he never lost, the hopes that were broken, his kindness and despair, his heart and soul poured out, everything he thought and everything he wrote for our great heritage were as much a part of him as his drinking. And I am like him, and I understand.
We're going to spend the second last chapter of our 5 hours of Henry Lawson's Soul of a Poet thinking about Henry the poet and the artist. He wrote more about it than you might think. He talked about the Jubilee riots, talked about everything starting from a Republican spirit. Queen Victoria's Jubilee in 1887 had the riots in Sydney with a Republican voice. Sydney was a newfound English colony. Before the Victorian era, it seemed to have been an extraordinarily multicultural place. Megan, come on back in, please. And he talked about seeing those riots, and he said, I had to write then, or burst, and the bulletin saved me from bursting. He was an unusually straight poet for his day. Yes, it was the late Victorian era, and he had 3 years of semi-formal education in the bush. His mum lobbied for the school. His dad built it, and he did have some education. But if there's one reason why he's our Henry, in a way unlike any other poet, if there was one book in the house growing up, it was Henry Lawson for a lot of people. And it's because he wrote the way we speak, which made his poetry jar and jolt a bit with some of the academics that were around, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But here's a piece of Henry's called "The Two Poets." This is from 1905. Thanks, dear. Sorry, dear.
Okay.
We're going to play Burke's Dream, which is a beautiful tune that was played in Mudgee under this poem. I'm so glad Megan could come and be part of this. And as soon as we've had our eye on this poem for a little while, but Megan is a fine poet and reciter in her own right, so she understands and is as interested in Henry Lawson's work as a poet as we are, I'm sure.
You'll make me blush on camera, Dad. I'm 13. You can't do that.
I remember 100 years ago. Okay.
Two poets were born where the skies were fair to live in the land hereafter, and one was a singer of sorrow and care, and one was a bard of laughter. With simple measure and simple word, the feelings of mankind voicing, And light hearts listened, and sad hearts heard, and they went on their way, rejoicing. The glad rejoiced that the world was gay, who took no thought of the morrow, and it ever has lightened the sad heart's way, to hear of another's sorrow. The poets died, while none were aware, for none could see the token, that light was the heart of the bard of care, but the heart of the other was broken.
To give you some idea how Henry thought of his own poetry and his own, yes, poor spelling and grammar and all those things he had wrong with his poetry. Here's his something from Megan about his he called it his first submission to the bulletin.
Yeah, when we were practicing this, I actually read through this one, and I said, "Oh, will you let me read that out?" because I related to it very personally. He describes things very well.
We all do, Digger. We all do.
It was mostly house painting now and odd jobs about. One wet night I was coming home through Hyde Park from working late on a job at Paddington. Rain and wind and swept boughs and sickly gaslights on the wet asphalt and poles and scaffolding about in preparation for the Jubilee celebrations. I'd sent a couple of attempts on the subject to the bulletin and had got some encouragement in answers to correspondence. And now the idea of Sons of the South or Song of the Republic came. I wrote it and screwed up the courage to go down to the bulletin after hours and intended to drop the thing in the letterbox. But just as I was about to do so, or rather making up my mind as to whether I'd shove it in or take it home and have another look at the spelling and the dictionary, the door opened suddenly, and a haggard woman stood there. And I shoved the thing into her hand and got away around the corner, feeling something like a person who'd been nearly caught on the premises under suspicious circumstances and was not yet safe by any means.
Thank you, Megan. That's terrific. Thanks for your contribution, mate. That's terrific. We're getting an idea. And yes, that carried through his whole life. He was, his grammar and spelling was not terrific, and he often stretched lines. He didn't particularly care, I don't think, and often I think you can see intent in his stretching of lines. So his metre was not as accurate as, say, a Banjo Patterson. John Dengate believed that was one of the reasons why Henry Lawson sung off the page so easily. Songs often do use that technique of stretched lines and melodies fit easier, but I don't know about that. I know John thought that. Certainly, I enjoy it in a contemporary sense. These days people will stretch lines more often. But he was self-conscious as well. So if an academic or a reviewer, I'm tempted to say that I'll think about those who can write, those who can't write about writers. But if one of his literary critics had a go at him, it usually went along the lines of a positive thing, a positive thing, a positive thing, and then a little bit of a complaint or two. Well, Henry would always react to that complaint, and this is one piece he wrote way back, actually, in 1891. I'm sure he was at his least secure at that point, and this is the tunes from David de Hugard.
Yes.
Once I wrote a little poem which I thought was very fine, and I showed the printer's copy to a critic friend of mine. First he praised the thing a little, then he found a little fault. The ideas are good, he muttered, but the rhythm seems to halt. So I straightened up the rhythm where he marked it with his pen, and I copied it and showed it to my clever friend again. You've improved the metre greatly, but the rhymes are bad, he said, as he read it slowly, scratching surplus wisdom from his head. So I worked as he suggested. I believe in taking time, and I burnt the midnight taper while I straightened out the rhyme. It is better now, he muttered. You go on and you'll succeed. It has got a ring about it. The ideas are what you need. So I worked for hours upon it. I go on when I commence, and I kept in view the rhythm and the jingle and the sense. And I copied it and took it to my solemn friend once more. It reminded him of something he had somewhere read before. Now the people say I'd never put such horrors into print if I wasn't too conceited to accept a friendly hint. And my dearest friends are certain that I'd profit in the end if I'd always show my copy to a literary friend.
It says it all, really, doesn't it? And we come now to the title, the eponymous piece from the whole series. We call it The Soul of a Poet because of our particular interest in what Henry said about his work as an artist and as a poet. Not surprising, really. It's our job, too, to do similar work. So his insights are striking. This is a medley. It's actually a piece called Will You Write It Down For Me? And then the song that we've made out of the verse, The Soul of a Poet from 1905. I've mentioned already, we thought of Henry as ours. He was just ours. Our Henry. No other poet was ours, but Henry was. This Will You Write It Down For Me, I think, is wonderful because it just goes to show that Henry knew that we thought that. But in a much deeper way, he gives away what it is to experience that, what it is to kind of be on the other side of writing for and with and on behalf of a people, us. And the poem, Soul of a Poet.
So, written in 1905. So by this stage, Henry's starting to hit his hard times, hit the dark years, and he's still driven to write. You can tell he still wants to write. That's what he wants to do. That's where he wants to be. But he's bitter about the fact that people don't seem to get it. People don't get it, but he keeps trying, he keeps writing, and like many poets, I guess he hopes one day his time will come. And I love this one because it's just straight up and down, or it feels like it's straight up and down what Henry thought, what he felt.
The tune we've used is our tune, but it is loosely based on a wonderful tune that came from Joe Yates, the great old bush fiddler from out at Safala, who would have been certainly around and seen Henry and been around him at times. A tune called The Wedding of Locke and McGraw. Joe wouldn't recognise it, I don't think, but we certainly got our inspiration for it from them. But first, will you write it down for me? In the parlour of the shanty, where the lives have all gone wrong, when a singer or reciter gives a story or a song, where a poet's heart is speaking to their hearts in every line, till the hardest curse and blubber at the thoughts of auld lang syne. Then a boozer lurches forward, with an oath for all disguise, prayers and curses in his soul, and tears and liquor in his eyes. He grasps the singer or reciter with a death grip by the hand. Well, that's the truth, bloke. Sling it at him. Oh, God blimey, that was grand. Don't mind me. I've got him. Well, you know. What's your name, bloke? Don't you see? Who's the bloke what wrote the poetry? Will you write it down for me? And the back block's bard goes through it, ever seeking as he goes for the line of least resistance to the hearts of men he knows. And he tracks them out in mateship, and he tracks them out alone, seeking for the power to sway them until he finds it in his own. Feels what they feel, loves what they love. He learns to hate what they condemn. He takes his pen in tears and triumph, and he writes it down for them.
as I have written, for the sake of my people and right. I was true when the iron had bitten deep into my soul in the night. I wrote not for praise nor for money, I craved but the soul and the pen, and I felt not the sting in the honey of writing the kindness of men. You read and you saw without seeing, my work seemed a trifle apart, while the truth of things thrilled through my being, and the wrong of things murdered my heart. But cast out and despised and neglected, and weak and in fear and in debt, my songs mutilated, rejected, shall ring through the commonwealth yet. Guileless, in the peace of your comfort and pride, you have mocked at my bodily vileness, you have tempted and cast me aside, but wronged and cast out, drink sodden, but shunned and insane and unclean. I have dared where few others have trodden, I have seen what few others have seen. I have seen your souls bared for a season, I have heard as a deaf man can hear, I've seen you deprived of your reason, and stricken with deadliest fear. And when beautiful night hid the shocking black shame of the day that was past, I felt the great universe rocking with the truth that was coming at last.
We've got time now to just bring Henry home with two short pieces before we, come to the end of 4.5 hours of Henry Lawson shows. If you haven't been back and had a look at parts 1 and 2, I hope you do get a chance at some time. They're all free, of course. They're all on YouTube. They're all, have a table of contents. Clever Megan puts a timestamp on them, which means you can just click on a song that you want to hear, or a poem or a story, or you could sort of have a listen to the whole thing and get to wander through Henry's life that we've just had the pleasure. It's been a privilege, it really has. I've been wanting to do a really, what they call these days, a deep dive on Henry's life for a long, long time. The two we're going to sing to bring Henry home. The first one is Henry's first poem, or one of his very first poems, and the second piece is his last poem of note. So the first one published in 88, but was written just a little before then. It's the simplest little love song. It's probably one of the only pieces of fiction Henry wrote, and it's the first piece of poetry of any kind, certainly of Henry Lawson, that Chloe and I set to music.
We picked the shortest one in the book.
Yes, we weren't too ambitious, we just wanted to have a go. So we set Shearer's song to music a long time ago. If you're out there, Tony and Helen, I should have really dug out Tony's extra words for this one. Anyway, maybe another time. It's nice to have your company anyway, Tony. Yeah. It's very nice to see you in quotes. Strange world we live in. On the end of this song, we play a tune called Jumble Springs, which we wrote to go with the song. And we dedicate that one. It was where my sister Jodie and her husband Richard, they were newly married and they were living at a property out west and south of Tottenham called Jumble Springs in those days. And it's Jodie's birthday today, so happy birthday, Jodie, if you're out there. And then we play the Home Sweet Home Mazurka, which we learnt at Home Rule, which is very close to Urundry. We learnt from Jack O'Kevin's up there. And we're bringing Henry home now to his beloved bush. season is over, the shearing is done, the wages are paid and the sprees have begun. But never a shanty draws sight of my check, or far down the Murray my Annie expects a heart that is faithful, a hair that is clear, and sufficient provisions to last for a year. Home Sweet Home, one of the tunes that Henry mentions in his writing, but turned into a mazurka. And yeah, we got that one from Jacko, right up there near Pipeclay, near Undry, at Home Rule. Home. Henry spent his first 15, 16 years in the bush, then in the Blue Mountains. He loved the bush, but his life came to an end in 1922. He was in Sydney, and he died. He was very crook. Of course, he'd been sick, he had a brain hemorrhage, and he died. Mrs. Byers was home with him, and he died in 22. All of the reasons why Henry had become an embarrassment, his alcoholism, his mental illness, his letting his family down, all those the things that made him a notable embarrassment around Sydney were gone. And all of a sudden he could become our great author again, and he was given our first state funeral. It was a huge affair. The Premier said no. But little Billy Hughes, the little digger sod, as they call him, who had embarrassed himself through the First World War with a couple of referenda on the subject of conscription, by 22, I think was ready to gain a little bit more popular support maybe, and he said yes to the state funeral, and Henry was buried in Waverley Cemetery. And all of a sudden, of course, he's got streets, Henry Lawson Drive, he's got a coming statue, he's got people lauding his work, he's got every second place in Sydney seems to have got Lawson as a name. The most ironic of all, of course, this poet who struggled his whole life to get 2 pennies to rub together, got his face on the $10 note. I just wonder sometimes if he wouldn't have swapped all of that to have been buried back at Pipeclay at Urundary. He's in writing is saying that that's what he wanted, but he's not. He's there at Waverley. This is his last poem of any note. We're going to finish with a dedication to not only here's to Henry, but here's to you, Chris Kempster, the late Chris Kempster, for all your help and work. This is Chris's tune that we're using.
Well, part of it.
Part of it, yeah. We've used a lot of Chris's settings tonight, 5 or 6, I think. It's great to finally get a chance. As I've mentioned a couple of times, in those early years when we were playing with Chris and the other wonderful people in that Songs of Henry Lawson show that played quite a few places around the place with Alison, John Dengate. I won't
it's
start.
Wonderful. It's wonderful to hear all these songs in different people's voices in your head too. They haven't only been sung by Chris, they've been sung by all sorts.
It was that Shearer song that Chris first heard, and that's how we ended up playing with him. But got to end up playing all kinds of things and learning so much. So, yeah, thanks for joining us. As we often say, it is a free show, but donations are very welcome. We will, if everything's gone okay and the technology hasn't let us down, it'll go up to YouTube. All 3 shows will be up on YouTube, usually by the morning. It's there. If anything has let you down, usually the internet can get a bit funny at times. And yes, I'll put a link in the comments as we come and have a chat to you all. Been some great company tonight. It's lovely to see these names floating by. Yes, and we'll go and have a talk, but I'll also put a link to our website, which is how the donations work. Or if you'd rather buy an album, that's great too, or a download album. You can pay whatever you like for a download album. You can chip in a bit more, or pay $1 if you want. We don't care. We just want you to have the album. We've got an album on there called The Soul of a Poet. That's the Henry Lawson album, but we've got a Lawson.
It looks like that.
It does, yeah. That's the last picture of Henry. The last one.
Sitting on the wharf.
So here's to you, mate.
Yeah.
And thanks. And yeah, I hope we can catch you around when catching you around is what we do again. But in the meantime, we'll be back here following on from Henry with a show of ours, brand new show called The Phonograph Jack. That's next Saturday night. And yeah, on we go with having a great fun with these Saturday streamings. It's just it's really made our week. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Have you seen the bush by moonlight from the train go running by? Blackened log and stump and sapling, ghostly trees all dead and dry. Here a patch of glassy water, there a glimpse of mystic sky. Have you heard the still voice calling, yet so warm and yet so cold? I'm the mother bush that bore you. Come to me when you are old. Did you see the bush below you, sweeping darkly to the range, all unchanged and all unchanging, yet so very old and strange, while you thought in softened anger of the things that did estrange? Did you hear the bush a-calling when your heart was young and bold? I'm the mother bush that nursed you. Come to me when you are old.
Come to me when you are old. I'm the mother bush that nursed you. Come to me when you are old.
In the cutting or the tunnel, out of sight of stack or shed, did you hear the grey bush calling from the pine ridge overhead? You have seen the seas and cities. All seems cold to you, or dead. All seems done and all seems told. Yet the grey light turns to gold. I'm the mother bush that loves you. Come to me now you're old.
Come to me now you are old. I'm the mother bush that loves you. Come to me now you are old.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, hope to see you in another Saturday streaming. If you're a newcomer, they're all quite different. We don't repeat much, if any. Just the odd one here has popped up in with a different theme. So every Saturday night's been different. Some are lighter and some. That's probably the last of Lawson we'll do for a while, but so. I'm going to miss him. But yeah, we move on from there. And thanks for your company tonight. Cheers, guys.
See you later.
Take care.